There's a number stamped on every Carfax report that dealers know means nothing. One owner. You see it, you relax, you assume. You picture a retired school teacher who changed the oil every 3,000 miles and kept the floor mats clean. That's exactly what you're supposed to picture, because that picture costs you nothing, and the dealer's margin depends entirely on you keeping it. What you don't see is the 6 months that car spent in a rental fleet before that one owner ever touched the steering wheel. What you don't see is the 200 people who drove it before him, none of whom were treating it like it was theirs, because it wasn't. What you don't see is the maintenance contract the rental company used, which doesn't look like what you or I would call maintenance. That car with one owner on the title may have 19,000 hard miles on it, from rental service before the odometer ever hit 20,000. This is a pipeline. Rental companies sell to wholesale auctions. Wholesale auctions sell to dealers. Dealers sell to you. And at every step of that pipeline, one piece of paper disappears. I know it disappears because I moved cars through that pipeline for 15 years. I watched it happen systematically, not accidentally. Not because of bad actors, because of structure. The structure is the scam. The rental car industry in the United States operates roughly 2.3 million vehicles at any given time, according to the American Car Rental Association. Those vehicles don't disappear when the rental company is done with them. They enter the used car market in enormous coordinated batches, typically at 12 to 18 months of age, with somewhere between 20,000 and 35,000 miles on the odometer. The timing is intentional. That age and mileage band puts the car squarely inside the sweet spot for used car retail, young enough to look certified, old enough to be off lease, cheap enough to finance. Enterprise alone sold 800,000 vehicles through its retail arm, Enterprise Car Sales, in a recent year. Hertz and Avis Budget Group move comparable volume through auction lanes. The big three rental companies combined unload over 1.5 million units annually into the secondary market. That's not a side business. That's one of the largest used car supply chains in the country, running quietly behind the branding you see at airport counters. And here is the specific thing they know that you don't. The title on a rental car almost never says rental car. It says private party or dealer, depending on how the car was registered and how the fleet company structured the sale. The FTC does not require sellers to disclose prior rental use in a retail transaction. Carfax will flag rental history if the data was reported, but rental companies are not required to report fleet usage to the vehicle history services. Required, not encouraged, not incentivized, not required. So the data gap isn't accidental, it's structural. And the dealer standing across the desk from you knows whether that car came from a rental fleet. You can usually tell by the auction run sheet. The problem is, you've never seen an auction run sheet. Now let's talk about what rental fleet use actually does to a vehicle, because this is where the information asymmetry gets expensive. A privately owned vehicle, driven by someone who owns it, has a built-in incentive system for careful use. You corner too hard, you feel it. You abuse the brakes, you pay for the pads. Ownership creates consequence. Rental use removes consequence entirely. Every driver who sits in that car has zero financial stake in what happens to it. And most rental contracts place the liability threshold high enough that minor mechanical abuse goes unreported and uncharged. Rental vehicles are driven harder on average than privately owned vehicles of the same type. A 2019 study published in the Journal of Consumer Research found that rental vehicle drivers consistently demonstrate more aggressive acceleration, higher sustained speeds, and harder braking than when driving their own cars. The effect held across age groups, income levels, and trip purposes. Transmission wear is the big invisible one. Automatic transmissions in rental vehicles experience repeated aggressive downshifting, particularly in hilly markets like San Francisco, Denver, or Seattle. Transmission fluid doesn't tell you that story. A visual inspection doesn't catch it. The transmission will function normally right up until it doesn't, usually 20,000 to 40,000 miles after you've bought the car. Suspension components take similar abuse. Speed bumps at rental return lots. Curb impacts by drivers unfamiliar with the vehicle's width. Parking lot encounters that never make it into a report because they were below the deductible. Rental fleet maintenance is scheduled, but scheduled maintenance is not the same as responsive maintenance. A privately owned car gets a wheel balanced when the owner feels a shimmy at 65 miles per hour. A rental car gets a wheel balanced on the quarterly fleet maintenance cycle, 90 days after the first driver felt that shimmy, and 89 days and 60 different drivers after the shimmy started. Here is the number that matters: the average repair cost differential between a former rental vehicle and a comparable private party vehicle identified within the first 3 years of ownership runs between $1,400 and $2,800, according to data compiled by iSeeCars and Consumer Reports. That's not worst case, that's average. You paid the same price for a car with a documented history of accelerated wear, deferred responsive maintenance, and 200 anonymous drivers. And the only reason you didn't know is that nobody was required to tell you. That changes today. The first thing you need is a rental fleet cross-reference check, and it costs nothing. Go to the National Motor Vehicle Title Information System, NMVTIS, at vehiclehistory.gov. This is a federal database mandated by the Justice Department, and it pulls from a separate data stream than Carfax or AutoCheck. NMVTIS receives data directly from state DMVs, insurance companies, and junkyards. It doesn't replace a Carfax, but it catches what Carfax misses, specifically title history events that happen at the state level before a vehicle history service picks them up. Run both, never just one. An NMVTIS report costs $2 to $5 depending on the provider. That's your starting point. The second tool is the VIN decoder cross-referenced against known fleet registration patterns. Type the VIN into the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration's VN Lookup at NHTSA.gov vehicle. That pulls recall history and original registration data. If the first registration is in a state where a major rental company headquartered or registered their fleet, states like Oklahoma, Virginia, or Missouri, that's a data point, not proof. A data point, stacked data points. Third, and this is the one dealers don't expect you to know, look up the VN in the fleet auction databases. Manheim and NHTSA, the two largest wholesale auction companies in the country, both have consumer-facing search tools. Manheim's is at manheim.com research. NHTSA's condition reports are accessible through their public portal. If that car moved through a fleet auction lane, that record may still be visible. I've seen dealers sweat watching a buyer pull up a Manheim condition report at the desk. That condition report tells you what an auction inspector noted about the vehicle before the dealer bought it. Scratches, paint, fluid levels, tyre depth, all documented, all time-stamped, all dated before the dealer's detailer got to it. Fourth, a pre-purchase inspection with a specific rental fleet protocol. This is not a standard oil and filter check. You need a transmission fluid analysis, not just a visual check, but a fluid sample sent to a lab. Blackstone Laboratories in Fort Wayne, Indiana, charges $35 for a fluid analysis and delivers a written report telling you whether the fluid shows metal particulate, oxidation, or heat damage consistent with aggressive use. If a mechanic won't pull a fluid sample for you, find one who will. A $35 fluid test on a $22,000 car is not optional. Also, ask specifically for an inspection of the rear brake rotors and pads. Rental vehicle rear brake wear is disproportionately high compared to privately owned vehicles because renters apply rear bias braking under stress. It's an instinct. A rear rotor showing uneven wear or deep scoring on a car with 28,000 miles is a signature, not a coincidence. Fifth is the paint depth gauge. This tool runs about $25 to $50 from Amazon. Search for paint thickness gauge or film thickness meter. It measures the paint depth on a car's body panels in microns. Factory paint depth on most vehicles runs between 90 and 200 microns. Anything significantly thinner indicates sanding or paint correction, the kind of work a refurbishment shop does to a rental vehicle before it enters retail. Anything significantly thicker indicates a respray over body damage. Run it on every panel: roof, doors, hood, trunk, all four fenders. A single panel reading outside the range is a flag. 3 panels outside the range is a pattern. Everything I just described, the NMVTIS pull, the Manheim research, the Blackstone fluid test, the paint gauge protocol. It's all compiled in the Dealer Vault Buyer's Checklist, available at the link in the description. It's organised as a field guide you can run from your phone while you're sitting in the dealer parking lot. Not after, not at home, while you're there. But stay here, because the next piece is the one dealers most actively hope you skip. This is about the certification, Certified Pre-Owned Programs. You see those letters, CPO, and the transaction feels safer, almost institutional. Ford CPO, Toyota CPO, Honda CPO. These programs have real standards. They do. But those standards apply to the inspection at certification, not to the history before the inspection. A car that was a rental vehicle can pass a CPO inspection and receive the CPO warranty and the CPO price premium. Nothing in the CPO standard prohibits prior rental use. Nothing in the certification process requires the history to be disclosed to you separately from whatever the vehicle history report shows. The CPO price premium runs between $1,500 and $3,500 over a comparable, non-certified vehicle, according to data from iSeeCars' annual CPO analysis. So you are potentially paying a $2,000 premium for certification applied to a car that was driven by rental customers for 14 months, refurbished by a fleet remarketing company, and brought to you through an auction lane. The CPO label is real. The history underneath it may be nothing like what you imagined. This is not speculation. Hertz's entire bankruptcy restructuring in 2020 and 2021 produced a documented influx of former rental vehicles into the CPO market. And multiple automotive journalists at Cars Direct and Automotive News tracked specific VINs from Hertz fleet auctions to CPO lots. The cars checked out on inspection. The history was what it was. Run your tools on CPO vehicles. Every single one. The sticker does not exempt the car from having a history. When you walk onto a lot now, you're not walking in blind. You have a $5 NMVTIS report, a free NHTSA VIN lookup, a Manheim condition report search, a 35 Bayreuth fluid analysis, and a 40-Allen paint gauge in your pocket. That's $80 total against a $20,000 decision. The dealer has no idea which buyers show up with that stack and which ones don't. When you pull out the paint gauge in the parking lot, something shifts. You're no longer the easiest sale of the afternoon. The conversation changes. The tone changes. Salespeople are trained to read buyers, but they're not trained for buyers who read back. The used car market moves 40 million vehicles a year in this country. Roughly 15% of those, 6 million units, have prior rental history according to research from iSeeCars' 2023 fleet vehicle analysis. 6 million. That's not a niche risk. That's 1 in every 6 used cars you look at. And in the segment, most buyers are shopping. The $15,000 to $30,000 range, 3 to 5 years old. The rental concentration is higher, not lower, because that's exactly where rental companies dump their off-lease units. The information was never hidden in a vault somewhere. It was hiding in the gap between what the industry is required to tell you and what it is convenient for them to tell you. Those two things are not the same list. Every person who watches this is one more buyer who walks into a negotiation knowing what the auction run sheet said. Share it with someone you know who is shopping right now, not because it helps the channel, because it costs them real money not to know this. The person who buys a former rental car thinking it's a cream puff doesn't find out for 2 years. They find out when the transmission quote comes in at $4,800 and they're still underwater on the loan. Subscribe if you want to stay armed, not as a favour, because the next video covers the specific language dealers use when a buyer starts asking too many questions. The exact phrases designed to slow you down, discredit your research, and move the transaction forward before you leave the building. You'll recognise every word, and you'll never fall for it again. Everything shared here is general consumer information. Always have a qualified mechanic perform a full pre-purchase inspection before buying any used vehicle.